Welcome to another episode of Cyber Secrets.
One of the most important things to know if you're law enforcement or anybody doing any sort of investigation is the basics of the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment states the right to the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. It shall not be violated, and no warrant shall be issued upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, particularly describe the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. What this means is that you need to have probable cause before you can start your analysis or investigation. Now, what does this mean for you? Well, a law or policy has to be in place and known by all it covers. Probable cause needs to be established, or investigation can start after that point. A chain of custody shall be retained against the Daubert, Frye, or the Federal Rules of Law. Document everything and stay within the scope of the investigation. Without step one, there's been no wrongdoing, no policy violation, or law being broken, so therefore there's no case or no reason to do the investigation. Now what you need to know is forensics is a science, period. If you do not get this simple fact, you have already failed in digital forensics. Due to this fact, as a science, your processes has to be repeatable and trustworthy. It is your job as an investigator to either prove or disprove a theory through scientific methods. This means there needs to be a theory or a scope before you can investigate. If not, you have already fouled up. Refer to the Fourth Amendment. Now, this is not an advanced law course, but what we are going to cover is some of the basic laws that you may have to deal with when doing any sort of forensics, especially digital forensics, such as the Federal Rule of Law, which deals with the Daubert and Frye standards, Fourth Amendment, which we just covered, Title 18 U.S. Code 1029, Access Control Devices, 1030, which is Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, which is the Wiretap Law, and Millennium Copyright Act, which is dealing with reverse engineering or subverting copyright or subverting security controls. Now, the Federal Rule 702 is part of the Federal Rules of Evidence, which basically focuses on testimony by subject matter experts, which basically means that you have to qualify as an expert, and everything that you do during the qualification, such as experience and things in that area. It also covers how admissible the evidence that you're testifying for, which basically means that it has to follow a standard. And the following two standards that we're going to cover are the Daubert and the Frye. So what this means for you basically comes down to everything that you do has to be specifically reproducible by subject matter experts or scientific peers within your community. If it doesn't, then it could be thrown out and probably should be thrown out as hearsay. Recently, one of the more common standards is called the Daubert standard. It's from a specific case, Daubert versus Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals in 1993. It has 4 things that it needs to accomplish. It's whether the theory or technique has been reliably tested and verified by 2 or more sources, not you, whether the theory or technique has been subject to peer review and publication, not by you, and 3, whether the known or potential rate of the method or theory can be established, and 4, whether the method has been generally accepted by the scientific community. So again, the key issue here is generally accepted. Now, what does this mean for you as an investigator? Well, whenever you use a tool, use one that's been generally accepted by the community, such as FTK, NK, Parabin, ProDiscover. There's lots of them that have. If you are going to use one that has not been generally accepted, use multiple tools or sources, because both those tools can then validate each other, such as if you find something with an open source tool that's relatively new that nobody else has been able to use another tool like either FTK, Parabin, any of these others, especially tools that law enforcement have been able to use, and at that point, it's going to make it more acceptable. But if you do not follow these standards, or if you take shortcuts, it's going to cause an issue. So the Frye standard is very similar to Daubert, except it's a little bit more flexible. But it's also called the general acceptance test, which means that everything that you do, The tools that you use, the methods or techniques that you use to analyze the evidence needs to be the same basic techniques that you generally used by the scientific community. In this case, the digital forensics community. If you use something completely different that nobody has been able to accept as general practice, there's a good probability, again, everything that you find can be potentially thrown out in court. Now again with Frye, do things basically the same way you would with a Daubert. Generally accepted methods, the tools that you use, the same as other people that are using tools. And if you do use anything other than a quote-unquote court-approved piece of software, then validate it with some other software. Because 2 is better than 1 if you come up with the same result. And document everything. Because if you can have them reproduce the same thing you did using the same steps, that gives a lot more admissibility to the evidence and a lot more credibility to you as an expert witness. So what is meant by general acceptance? For example, when trying to validate the integrity of evidence, use a hashing algorithm to validate the integrity of that file of the drive, not using witchcraft or a ghost whispering medium. When doing digital forensics, it's extremely easy to potentially come across a gray line or even cross the black line, which basically means do not do the same things the hackers do. For example, Title 18 U.S. Code 1029 deals with access control devices, or just access control in general, which means using usernames, passwords, account numbers, things in that area. This can get you in trouble, but you also need to know it for hacking cases, so you know what to either disprove or prove if you are actually dealing with somebody that has compromised a server or stolen credit card numbers, or possibly even identity theft. So what does this mean for you? Well, if you do come across any sort of account information, username, password, crypto key credentials, backdoors, or anything in that aspect, don't use it. That's what the hacker will do. You need permission from either the system owner, if you're doing the investigation for them, or the OK from the court. For example, if you see somebody's username and password from an email account, let's see Gmail or Hotmail or Live go through the wire, you're not allowed to use it. What you're going to have to do at that point is then get a court order from that service provider to then give you that information. If you were to log in using those credentials, you would actually be hacking into the service provider and in violation of Title 18 U.S. Code 1029 or possibly even 1030. So now let's talk about Title 18 U.S. Code 1030, or the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It's basically outlaws accessing computers used in interstate commerce. So if you access any government system, a financial system, anyone that does healthcare or have health information, or does interstate commerce, you've then violated federal law. This also covers trafficking in passwords, or even threatening to damage a computer. So what does this mean for you? Well, don't exploit a system or gain unauthorized access to a system without the express authorization of the system owner or the OK from the court, or else you're just as bad or even worse as the suspect. Now let's talk about wiretap. The Electronic Communications Privacy Act is the new wiretap law on steroids. The Stored Communications Act is a subset of that, which means if it's no longer in transit, it's covering other laws to access it. For example, Title 18 U.S. Code 2511 is the intercepting of communications, which means you need a court order or authorization of the system owner. Title 18 U.S. Code 2701 through 2711 is the unlawful access to stored communications all the way through to the disclosure of that communication in a lawful means. So what does this mean for you? Do not wiretap without express permission or authorization from the system owner or the OK from the court. This means tapping a phone line, putting in some sort of packet sniffer or packet analyzer like Wireshark or any of these others, or TCP dump in the line, or even getting a parabolic mic to listen to their phone conversations or their even personal conversations when they have an expectation of privacy. Now for some intellectual property right issues. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act. This basically is an act that prevents people from reverse engineering or bypassing security controls. This is a very interesting one because this goes directly for the intellectual property, such as DVDs, music, things in that area to where they have security mechanisms in place, and if you change it from one medium to another, that may fall under a DMCA violation. Now, what does this mean for you? Well, don't reverse engineer without the system or asset owner's express permission. If you do, and they find out, they can come after you against the DMCA. This happens time and time again at DEF CON. This is a hacker convention where a security researcher will find a vulnerability and the vendor doesn't like it, so they threaten lawsuits. The other thing is, the U.S. Copyright Office on October 26, 2012 specified jailbreaking a smartphone is deemed legal, but the same rules do not apply to tablets or gaming consoles. The biggest problem potentially here is you can jailbreak an iPhone, but you can't necessarily jailbreak an iPad. That's going to be in here. Now here's where the monkey wrench gets thrown in. Most of the mobile forensics tools actually do what's called a temp jailbreak or temp root to get access to the system. So at this point, even the forensic community, they can absolutely do an iPhone, but now they can't really do an iPad based off of the Copyright Office's new definition. So thanks, industry. With that said, anybody doing a bring your own data environment, this is a whole new monkey wrench that you're throwing in there. Because if it's their device, unless you have other evidence that has been on the network that you can use against them, they can then revoke consent based off the Fourth Amendment. So at that point, it doesn't matter about the jailbreaking the iPhone. You can't even jailbreak their iPhone or their iPad. As far as laws are concerned, we just covered the tip of the iceberg. For example, there's Title 18 U.S. Code 1028 for identity theft, 1343 for wire fraud, 1362 for communication interference, even 2252 for distribution of child pornography. There's many, many more. Plus, there's also state laws. And if you're dealing with the international jurisdiction, there's a bunch of laws there they're going to have to deal with. It all comes down to know your jurisdiction and know the industry that you're in, because even industries have their own, such as HIPAA for health insurance. You have GLBA for anybody that does financial transactions, and then you have FISMA and a bunch of others. So know your own jurisdiction. Now to the fun things, the top 10 forensic fouls. 1. Work on original data when not required. You always want to work on the copy if you absolutely can. 2. Break chain of custody or the COC document, and sometimes even falsify it. I've seen that happen a lot. 3. Modify the data or tamper with it after the acquisition and or not document it. This again breaks chain of custody. 4. Miss common evidence artifacts due to either laziness or misunderstanding of how to actually find the content. 5. Fail to understand evidence is not 100% reliable. Anything can be fake. 6. Do not hash the drive of the files, so now you have no integrity validation. 7. Do not control access to the evidence and or document it. This is a COC or chain of custody break. 8. Do not validate and test the policies and procedures and tools that you use. This goes back to the Daubert to the Federal Rule of Evidence 702. 9. Rely on only one tool. Only one tool can miss a lot of items. And 10. Do not stay within scope of the investigation. When you go beyond scope, you're missing out on billable hours, and you're also potentially finding things that can no longer be admissible in court, because it may not fall under the plain view doctrine.
The Cyber Secrets web series covers computer forensics, hacking, and everything in between. Thank you for your continued support of Cyber Secrets. With the reboot of the different series, we want to ask if you have ideas for future content or suggestions for improvement. Please let us know. Click subscribe for new episodes of Cyber Secrets.